Meet you.
You too. Thank you, sir.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Welcome to Bharat FM. I'm Mayank Chaya. I want to apologize for this rather unusual delay. I think we perhaps messed up on the communication about the live link. As part of our commitment to bring you news stories of local interests, Bharat FM's Cincinnati stream is particularly pleased to bring you today Mr. Bruce Hoffbauer, who is running for sheriff of Hamilton County. He is a Republican. Mr. Hoffbauer began his career 34 years ago as a law enforcement professional in 1985 as a Hamilton County deputy sheriff, where he was assigned to the corrections division initially. In 1986, Mr. Hoffbauer entered the 68th recruit class of the Cincinnati Police Academy as a police recruit, and over 3.5 decades nearly later, he's right there in front of us, talking to us about his prospects as the next sheriff of Hamilton County. Welcome to Bharat FM, Mr. Bruce Hoffbauer.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I want to start with some levity. In India, I don't know if you've heard the term Bollywood.
I haven't.
Okay, Bollywood is the Indian version of Hollywood, which is the world's biggest cinema-producing nation, you might know.
Okay.
And I just discovered that you grew up in something called Delhi Township, right?
I did. Well, we called it Delhi, but I'll go with Delhi. Yes, sir.
Okay, now I've deliberately called it Delhi because it gives me an interesting segue to what I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
When I said Delhi, I would presume India, and then I would presume Hindi cinema. And a lot of Hindi movies have this rather cliched line about the police. And I'm going to translate it for you and then get your reaction to begin with.
Okay.
The line says something to this effect: it is unwise to be either friendly or inimical with the police. That's the cliched line that a lot of characters use. The implication being that you keep your safe, detached distance. What do you think of an approach like that?
I think that you need to be very friendly with police officers and law enforcement because we are just ordinary people. You know, we wear that uniform every day, but when we take it off at night and we're at home with our families, we have the same things that make us happy and sad. So sometimes police officers think they're so different, and sometimes we're viewed that way, but really we're the same as everybody else. We're just doing this job and trying to do the best we can. So being friendly is what really law enforcement should be with the community.
All right. You come from a family of law enforcement professionals. I was reading your background and struck by the fact that almost the entire family has a very long connection with the law enforcement, starting with your father, Mr. Ray Hoffbauer, who retired as a colonel in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office for 52 years. That's how long you worked.
Yeah.
Your wife, Patty, has been with the prosecutor's office. Your mother was also involved. Your children are involved. So tell me, what is the draw of the law enforcement beyond, of course, the idea of service to the community?
So as I grew up as a little boy, to me, my hero in my life was my dad. And I saw him as this very larger than life person wearing his uniform. And so to me, that's what I wanted to emulate. I wanted to be just like my dad. And so as I got older, that's where I kind of put my career path. And even to this day, I still think of my dad. He's 85 years old, and he still is really my hero. And I always said, if I could be half of the man and half of the police officer and half of the dad that he's been, then I would be a successful person. And so that's really what guided me, was wanting to be like my father. And I wish that more kids would want to be like their mom and their dad. And I think we would be in a better place if we took that good career path.
As you were coming of age and perhaps coming to a stage where you could discuss your career plans with your father, was the inherent danger of the job discussed at any great length?
Very much so. And my father had been in some very difficult situations as a police officer, and I heard the stories and I knew about the dangers. And my mom, who, like you said, my mom worked at the prosecutor's office. She worried about my father every day, but at the same time, she was so proud of him. She's passed away 6 years ago, but she was so proud of him that I couldn't see him doing anything else, and I couldn't see my mom being any more proud of what my dad was doing. And so that translated into what I wanted to do. And I think my kids saw what my wife and I were doing as police officers, and that's why they followed in our footsteps, because the dangers were there, but I believe they are in it for the right reason, as was I. And it's this passion of service to people.
Do you have any recollection of day one when you put on the uniform?
I certainly do. So the very first day was when I started with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, and I put on the uniform the very first day, and I stood in the kitchen with my mom and dad, and my dad being very, kind of tough guy, but my mom was weepy, and she had a tear in her eye. But then when I went on to Cincinnati, my dad, when I graduated from the academy, my first day in uniform, my dad got up and gave a speech, and he got very emotional because he felt like I was trying to be like him, and he felt very successful that I took the right path in life.
Do you have any recollection of what he might have told you as early tips to be on the force? I
do. Out of high school, I wanted to join the military because he was in the military, and he served in the Middle East and Germany and saw a lot of things. And I wanted to do that like him, but he wanted me to go to college, and he didn't want me to be a police officer. He thought I could make more money or be happier doing something else. So he tried to talk me out of the law enforcement thing at one time. But once he saw my passion for it, I said, Dad, I want to go to college. I want to learn this job. And so I did. I went to the University of Cincinnati and got my bachelor's degree. And then I went on into law enforcement. So I did take his advice that I went to college, but I did not take his advice. I followed in the law enforcement footsteps. And really, I don't think he would have had it any other way.
To change gears a bit, a feature of policing in America that many in India find somewhat intriguing and perhaps beyond their immediate grasp is that sheriffs here are elected along party lines, political party lines. Whereas in India, it's sort of an autonomous system where they rise from the ranks and go on to become an equivalent of a sheriff. Mm-hmm. Why do you think this system has evolved in America where ideological preferences are pretty open?
I think the way it works in America, the way that the sheriffs are elected goes back to when we were in the United States, were colonies, and the king, you were a subject of the king, and the king would have what they called the shire. The shire would collect taxes of the people who owned property, which were called reefs. So over time, the word shire reef turned into sheriff, and you collected taxes for the king. And over time, that became a political position where you were elected down from the king. And I think it stuck. I really think that in a sheriff's office, coming through the ranks is a good thing. Sometimes appointments to the position of sheriff can get the best candidate, and sometimes not. But what I don't like is that in America, you have to say I'm a Republican or Democrat as you run for sheriff. Because when we arrest somebody or we go to your house, we don't say, I'm sorry, are you a Democrat or Republican? We enforce the law equally, and justice is blind. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the negative things in America, that we have to be elected in a party.
Would you recommend that as part of a possible reform where anyone running for an office like this doesn't have to say his or her political affiliation? Because, as you said, it's irrelevant.
Right. I think it would be something to definitely consider, that you don't have to put a Republican or a party line next to a Democrat. I think you absolutely have to have served in law enforcement. You had to have served as a supervisor, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary to identify a party affiliation. So that's something that I would absolutely entertain if legislators would go that way. In America, I don't know if they will, but it's something to consider, absolutely.
Traditionally, policing by its very nature has been seen across the world as a sort of a reactive exercise, but your perspective is that it should be proactive. Tell
Yeah.
us why you think that.
In America, we always were this very reactive. We waited for the problem to happen and then we responded to the problem. And now in present day, it's really better to find out what the problem is first. Be forward thinking, collaborate with the community, talk to the community. As we said in the beginning of our conversation, be nice and connect with the community, because then you can find out what some of the problems are on the front end. If it has to do with children, drug dealing, different types of crimes in the area, if you can identify problems or people by dealing with the community, then you can be more proactive and even prevent those things from happening. So just to sit back and wait for the bell to ring and then run out like a fireman would do, I think you're not getting the best use of your resources. So proactiveness is seeking out the problem instead of waiting.
That kind of proactive approach, do you think it goes perhaps to the heart of the current ferment across the country about social justice within the police system, where there is a growing clamor that the systemic injustice is pretty rampant?
Mm-hmm.
If you are suggesting that police take a sort of a preemptive, proactive approach, do you think that could answer some of the problems that we are facing?
I do. And I think that the proactiveness would not be something to where, and I know it has happened in law enforcement across this country, is we don't target individuals. We just don't jump out of the police cars and grab people. That proactiveness is not good. The proactiveness of, again, a great collaboration with the community, all of the community, different races and creeds, and we find out what is really needed in that community. That proactiveness can really cut down on systemic racism, systemic targeting of the wrong people in the community. So that's a positive proactive versus the negative proactive, grabbing people because they're standing on a street corner.
Right. You're seeking a top position at a time that we just discussed, at a time of a major ferment. How do you look back at your 3 decades in the force, and how do you propose to balance that with the current mood in the country?
You know, when I started almost 35 years ago, the technology was not available, the equipment was not available, the training wasn't available, and even the recruitment of a very diverse workforce of men and women from all different walks of life was not available. And I think now we have to look and let's get the technology, the best training, the best equipment, and the best diverse workforce we can possibly find, because now we are really solving the problems. If we have all those things at our fingertips, it helps us in solving the problems. 35 years ago, it was usually all white men in law enforcement. And now we see that's not the case. I look for people of color, people from different nationalities, people who speak different languages, because that's what our community is made of. So we need to make our law enforcement, our police departments reflective of our communities. And we never used to do that. We need to now.
From what you're telling me, it appears to me that you have thought through over this particular debate that's raging across the country over discriminatory policing, and you seem to have some specific ideas as you seek this office. Would you like to elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. So I saw some injustices, as I went through my career. People of color were targeted because they were people of color. People, because of their religion, because of their male or female, were targeted because maybe they were in a place that they shouldn't. And that was not the best approach. That was the approach 35, 50 years ago. But as I look at it now, I embrace and am looking for bringing people into training that can teach us different cultures, teach us different mental health issues, teach us different physical needs, so that when police officers engage someone, that we don't already have predisposed in our minds that they are bad or that they are good. Let's just say that everyone's different. And if we understand we're all different, and if we got some people who have some training, say, for example, somebody has a special medical need, they're autistic. If we have someone who is autistic and we have some training how to deal with that individual, that could keep us from having to use force and understanding that that person is uncomfortable around law enforcement. Same thing with languages. Maybe someone speaks a different language. And so if we can have some education into that and break down some of those barriers, the communication will start and flow much easier.
I asked this particular case merely because it's in the context of the larger debate that we are having. Your own personal experience in 1990 that I'm sure you have grappled with for a long time,
Right.
where a man ended up dying after you shot, and in self-defense you were cleared subsequently. But there are still people who have misgivings about that. Now that you're seeking this office. I'm not looking in particular sense that incident, although you can always talk about that.
Right.
My question is a broader one. What is it? How does that particular experience inform as you seek this top office?
Well, so I did. I had to take a human life in defending myself and my partner and some other citizens. And this individual had mental problems. They had alcohol and substance abuse problems, and this individual was in the process of committing suicide. He wrote a note to his mother, and he was self-mutilating himself with a knife, and he was killing himself when I got there. And so that was something I had to do, and I carried it with me for all these years. I wish I never had to do that, but as a police officer, I knew that that could happen someday. And as I go back to what I said before, some people, my opponent, some other people are trying to make that an issue when in fact, as you said just a minute ago, it was justified and I was cleared of any wrongdoing because it was what was called suicide by cop incident. But we did not have the training available 30 plus years ago. We didn't have that equipment I talked about. We didn't have the mental health people that could come out into the scenes with us and help us. So as I go back 30 years, if I would have had a taser available to me, that might have helped. If I would have had some training, different training in de-escalation, if I would have had training in or had someone there with me who had mental health training, and we didn't have much back then, the outcome could have been different. And if I could go back in time, if I could wave a magic wand, that would be what I would do. But I did what I did at the time when I was under attack to save my life and others. And it was an unfortunate thing. But, we as the police department learned from it. We got better training, and I was completely cleared of everything. And my opponent and other people bring that up to inflate and fan the flames of what's happened around the country, and that's really not fair. But I'm always happy to talk about it when it comes up.
You mentioned training, and I'm aware that you were involved with the academy, right? Training Academy.
Yes.
Do you, as part of your possible mandate, if you win and take over, would you think in terms of broadening the way the academy trains officers, just beyond enforcing law in a particular situation? After all, policing is much, much more than just whipping a gun out and enforcing the law, I suppose.
Oh, yes. There are certain mandates that have to be met in the police academy. So the basic hours in Ohio, the basic hours are 630 hours, I believe. When I was the academy commander for the Cincinnati Police Department, we actually doubled that. So we went double those hours. So we went in many, many more areas of the training. And what I had the availability to do there, which I want to do in the sheriff's office, is to bring in de-escalation, bring in implicit bias, bring in more diversity training, bring in more use of the body-worn cameras, bring in other tools that we can wear on our belts that we might not have to go to our firearm to end the situation like I had to 30-some years ago. So those things I look to embrace. I was able to do that in Cincinnati. We doubled the training, and when these Cincinnati officers got out, we believe they were the best trained in the country. And when I'm the sheriff here, I want the deputy sheriffs to be the best trained in the country.
Even beyond systemic discrimination or personal prejudices or color bias, I think, I've covered the policing business in India as well. What's important to me personally is de-escalation that you mentioned. Everything else follows after that, right? Once you de-escalate the situation, all of these questions can come to the fore and be discussed. Why is it that de-escalation is not such a top priority across police forces in this country?
because it's not a new concept. I think it's always been there, but I just don't think anyone has taken the initiative to say, hey, we really need to make this a priority, because we go back to police officers are usually reactive. We show up, we do what we have to do because of what's there, and we never really had the training to de-escalate through talking to somebody, through your body language, through how you interact with them, just with your presence. And I just think that it's been one of those things that has been skipped over many, many years in law enforcement. And we absolutely have to have de-escalation as part of the training curriculum, because how do you measure it right now? I don't know. But if we can de-escalate one incident, just one incident a day, think of how that saves injury to the officer, injury to the citizen. It gives a better rapport between the community and policing. And so it's something that I think the best answer is nobody is taking the initiative to say we have to do it, and I'm going to do that.
Among the issues that you are raising is one contention where you say that the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office lacks a vice team dedicated to fighting street-level crime.
Right.
Tell me a bit about that, because I'm not extremely familiar with the intensity of street-level crime in this area. As I said, I live in Chicago, which is which is a hub of street-level crime. So I'm aware of that.
So in Cincinnati and some places like Chicago, they have the availability because of manpower that they can put officers in plain clothes and really go out, as we talked about, being proactive, looking for those street level type prostitution, drug, crimes of disorder that are happening on the street level. The sheriff's office has been very reactive, as we talked about historically. And the sheriff's office here has not had a group of men and women who were dedicated to being proactive to seek out those things that you can get in the front end of those to keep them from happening. So the drug dealing and prostitution and quality of life issues were never really handled until it became a big issue in the county. So in the sheriff's office, I'd like to have a group of men and women who focus on that and get out ahead of that and can really reduce the car break-ins in your neighborhoods, the selling of the drugs, the prostitution, the drinking outside, things like that, which all affect quality of life in the neighborhoods we live in. I think it would be a great public relations thing with the community.
Another thing that I read about on your website is you do not see the sheriff as just a top cop, but someone who is an administrator of a lot of things, including budgeting. What's your priority as if you become the sheriff? What kind of budget administration would you be interested in?
The budget is always a very large topic in the sheriff's office, because the sheriff's office operates on a budget that is provided to him or her through the county commissioners. And you have to have a good working relationship with the county commissioners because they provide the money. I think in the sheriff's office now, there is a lot of waste. I think that we have to, and I'm sure you do the same thing, when you write a check, that's coming out of your checkbook, and you have to be very vigilant of how you spend the money. I think that the sheriff's office has not been vigilant, and the checkbook's kind of been open, and the money's been spent, and there's duplication of services, and it's not been watched. You have to operate within your budget like you do in your household. You have to operate within your budget. I don't think that's happened. So one of the priorities that I want to do is to make the morale good for the men and women, but that budget issue, if you can get that back in line by teaching people, listen, spend the money like it's coming out of your pocket, and you'll spend it more wisely. And then you can stretch out the dollars and you get more bang for your buck. And I think that then gives a better working relationship with the commissioners, and the community sees that you're paying attention with their tax dollars. And that's really what it is.
A third aspect of, again, reading from what you write on your website is your area of concern is opioid crisis. The way you're describing, my sense again is that you're looking at policing just beyond policing. It's a societal job eventually. What do you think the police generally and the sheriff's office particularly can do to battle the opioid crisis that you refer?
The opioid crisis, and this is one of the many things that makes me very different than my opponent. My opponent has never worked on the street as a police officer ever. Her entire career has been in a jail setting, which is very important and it's very dangerous. And I worked in a jail, but I think you have to be out in the community and understand this opioid problem. And it starts with education, even to our young people. It starts with education and understanding that the opioid problem is a disease, like alcoholism is a disease. And we have to be able to just not lock somebody up because of the problem, but provide treatment prior to getting arrested. And then if you do get arrested, treatment in a facility, and then a safe pathway out so you can maintain treatment to keep you on the right path. I've had the opportunity to see people with needles in their arms overdosing from heroin, where I had to use the Narcan to bring them back to life. And it's horrible. And I think sometimes the police officers become somewhat jaded and they think, oh, there's another drug user or whatever. But I had a very good friend die of a heroin overdose. And to me, when I see that, I think of my friend, how she died, and it becomes very personal. So I want people to know that the opioid epidemic, you have to invest in training, invest in education, and invest in treatment. And it's not going to totally go away, but again, I think we can make tremendous progress in that area.
That gives me a great segue into my next question, which is, again, a broader one about the very high incarceration rate across America. For minor infractions and crimes, people just get clapped in and are locked up for years, destroying generations. If you become sheriff, at least in your domain, what do you think can be done to significantly reduce just unnecessary incarceration? That I know it's not the police's job to do it, it's the court system, but the action begins with the police arresting people, right?
It does. And that goes back to one of the things you and I discussed earlier, is working with the community. The sheriff needs to work with the prosecutor and the judges. And 30 years ago, it was a lock everybody up and throw away the key mentality. We have to save the room. As your sheriff, I have to save the room in the jail for the most violent of offenders. Those low-level misdemeanors and things that are not so serious where you injure somebody or assault somebody, we need to either cite them to court, provide other options, home incarceration, programs outside of the jail, because to put somebody in jail for possession of marijuana, to put somebody in jail for the most minor of offenses is counterproductive to what we're doing. It costs money. It costs money to incarcerate them. It costs money to pay the deputies to work there. And it's really not fixing the problem. And so my idea is saving it for the most violent offenders. My opponent was for a no cash bail philosophy, that if you get arrested, you don't have to post bail. You can just get processed and go back out. I don't believe that. Violent offenders and serious property crimes must go to jail and have posted a bail or bond. But these low-level misdemeanors and nonviolent things, I think we can come up with alternative ways of working outside the community, citing them to court and saving room in the jail.
The last couple of questions. One is about the kind of fractiousness that has trickled down in the last 3-4 years, politically, I mean. And it's obviously affecting law enforcement officers across the country. Where do you come down on the kind of rhetoric that has taken place? Unfortunately, I have to say it on the Republican side, predominantly, starting from the president down. How do you, as a career professional who deals with difficult situations day in and day out, balance with the kind of inflammable words that are often spoken in political space?
And it's unfortunate that people do that. And as I have been in law enforcement, and I plan to be the next sheriff here in Hamilton County, I have to do this. I have to follow the rule of law, and I have to be neutral. I cannot be biased, and I cannot use, again, as I go to my opponent wants to use the office of sheriff as a political platform to push out her political views and agendas, very much like we see is happening on our national level with the presidency. And I want to remain away from that. I can agree or disagree with things that people say. The beauty of this country is your First Amendment gives you the right to say that. And I respect that. I don't want someone to then act on it and destroy things and break things because now you violated the law and I think there's a consequence. But I have to remain neutral as your sheriff. And I need to enforce the law equally and treat everybody with dignity and respect. I would just ask when people fan those flames and they have that rhetoric, just ask them to not do that because it's not going to turn out well for anyone. But as much as I have personal feelings, as you have personal feelings, I can't interject those into the job of sheriff because then I'm swaying myself to the right or to the left. And I think I just need to remain neutral down the middle, treat everybody equally, everybody with dignity and respect, and follow the rule of law. And I think I'll be more productive if I do that.
And finally, what kind of contact have you had with the Indian American community in this area?
Honestly, not a lot. I'm worked very closely with Dr. Samarco. Dr. Samarco, what a wonderful lady. I think she could run for anything and get elected. She's beautiful. And then Raj, the trustee, and Coleraine. And Raj was a deputy sheriff when I first started. He was there. So working with Raj. But occasionally, you would, as a police officer, you would come around someone or meet someone who was from India. But in the areas that I worked, there was not a lot of interaction. And that's what I go back and said before. Even though it might not be that much, we have to be schooled as law enforcement professionals to understand different cultures, understand different ways, different clothing, different observances. And so covering as much as we can so that when we do interact with each other, we're not offended, we don't offend each other, and we have a good relationship. So I wish I could say I've had a whole lot, but to be honest, I really haven't had too terribly much.
On that note, Mr. Hoffbauer, I want to thank you for your time, for appearing on our Bharat FM live stream. And hopefully things will work out for you. And all the best. And thank you for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. Thank you much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.